Have you heard about the Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman gift guide? It's a curated collection of my favorite things to gift yourself or someone else this season. From conscious consumption to wellness hacks and treat yourself services, it's a guide for those who live and give intentionally. Grab your free copy on Substack at curiouslifeofachildfreewoman.substack.com. Welcome to Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman, a podcast exploring today's most interesting topics through the lens of a happy child-free life. Every week, I chat with experts inspiring us to think differently, live intentionally, and find fulfillment on our terms. Whether you're child-free or seeking a space where parenthood isn't part of the conversation, you are welcome here. It's not about comparison, it's about possibility. Before we start the episode, do you know about the Curious Life Club on Substack? It's a free community to enjoy bonus content and sneak peeks and to connect with other cool women like you. Join us at curiouslifeofachildfreewoman.substack.com. Now let's get curious together. 'Tis the season for getting together. But in general, we have largely sacrificed having people over for more solo self-care, and hosting has turned from art form to stressful exercise that seems less necessary in a modern society. We tell ourselves the house isn't ready, the menu's too much, or we don't have the energy to make it perfect, so we don't plan anything at all. Chelsea Fagan wants to change that. She's the author of Having People Over, a modern guide to gathering that's really about connection, not performance. Chelsea reminds us that in a world that often feels disconnected and transactional, there's nothing more radical than opening your door and letting people in. I am not a big reader, but I'm in love with this book. I have a lot of passion for hosting parties, and I'm in full fangirl mode already. Welcome, Chelsea.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. Okay, so after reading your book, it sounds like you grew up in a household that had a tradition of entertaining, and hosting was really the norm. But I really appreciate your perspective because you're not a party planner or an event trade planner. Seems like hosting is more of a hobby. So why did you want to write a book about it?
Because as you mentioned in the opening, it's just a time where it has become more and more of a dying art, and more people are uncomfortable even with the idea of welcoming other people into their homes. And I think we've lost the idea that this is a very important thing, not just for our social lives, but also for our sense of community. I think the fact that most of our interaction with other people now takes place through a screen is very damaging in ways that I think we won't even fully understand for a very long time.
Why do you think we have lost our affinity for that communal feeling of having people over? Is it the internet? Is it women working and we're busy all day, so we don't want to do this when we get home? How did we get to this place?
I think it's all of it. I think more people work, so there's not a person who's staying home and taking care of the domestic space. I think people are exhausted. I think they often don't have what feels like any extra bandwidth. It's usually not a question of money for the most part, because when you look at the stats, people go out to eat more, they order in more, they do all of these things that are objectively more expensive than cooking in the home. But I just think it's a question of feeling like you don't have the effort or the bandwidth. And then the more the people around you don't make such an effort, the less inclined you're going to be to do it.
I'm glad you brought up money because you're also the co-founder of the Financial Diet, which I'm sure a lot of people listening follow and appreciate. And that's true when you say those stats. I think people on the face of it think hosting is expensive. I'm going to have to buy all these booze and bring all this food in or make all this stuff. And it seems like it's going to be a big expense. But you're right. We don't necessarily stop ourselves from getting a cocktail with a friend or going out to dinner or ordering in when we're too tired to cook.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, it's nice to know that we can do it on a budget. And you talk a lot about that in your book.
Yeah, I mean, I think people are just not being honest with themselves when you're making a meal for yourself and one other person that you couldn't make one extra serving. Whether or not you want to do that is your business, but I think there's a lot of making this about problems other than the one that it is. And it's totally valid to say that I'm tired, I'm overworked, I don't have the bandwidth, etc. And I'm certainly not saying anyone needs to be throwing elaborate cocktail parties, but I do think that the entire concept of welcoming someone else into your home in a casual way, finances are rarely the barrier to that. Occasionally, but not usually. And also, even when you think about it in terms of space, Americans live in much bigger spaces than they ever have, on average, 2 to 3 times the average home size, both when you look at other countries, but also the way our homes used to be built. So it's certainly not a question of not having enough space. But ironically, Americans just have way bigger homes, but it's just filled with more stuff, not with more people.
Yeah, it's so true. We have a house in Chicago and it's an old home that we've been restoring. And my whole thing, like if you've ever seen that episode of The Office where he's like, we bought this condo to fill with children, I feel like we bought a house to fill it with friends. Obviously, we're child free. So that's to me, what's the point? I want this space. I wanted a big kitchen. I wanted all this stuff so that we could have people spend time in it. But I don't know how many other people think that way.
Totally.
Okay. Well, we talked about money. We've talked about space. Let's talk about toxic self-care culture because I like how you bring this up as a barrier. This is one of those things that I have felt this before. And I'm like, am I the only person in the world who has this idea? And then I listened to your book and I was like, no, she has a whole section on this. So can you say more about what that means?
To me, toxic self care is the intersection of capitalism and really dubious therapy culture, where oftentimes half the people giving this advice aren't even qualified in any way. But it's this focus on self care being about the self first and foremost. And I think that for many people really misses the point because when you look at what contributes to basically all the markers of well-being and happiness as well as longevity and good health, it is very intrinsically about the community. It's about others. It's about connection, belonging, and all of these other things that isolating ourselves is not going to help us do. Now, this is not to say that we never need time for ourselves, but I think there's a big strain of therapy speak that encourages you to put your, not just your needs, but your short term immediate needs, immediate gratification in front of others, including people that you may have committed to. And I think that is something that in the long term, and even in the medium term, I think has many more negative effects than the alternative. My birthday is in the dead of winter. I feel terrible asking people to come to my party. And often I don't even throw one because I'm like, I'm not even going to ask this of people. But when you are the person who's getting invited to something, you RSVPDS to something, and it's dark at 4 p.m. and it's cold and it's raining and you don't want to go, on every level, it feels more like care in the moment to say, well, then I'm just going to bail. But I think we really underestimate the long and short-term damage that does, not just to our friends or the people that love us or the people that were counting on us, but also to ourselves, because ideally one day we'll be counting on them to show up for us.
It's so true. I think that moment where, yeah, exactly as you described, it's 4 p.m., you don't want to do it anymore. And we have all this coaching out there on the internet that it's good for our boundaries. It's good for our mental health to do what we need in the moment and say no more than we say yes. But what if for your mental health, you think in the moment, it's better for me to go to bed? What about the friend on the other end where for their mental health, they need to be with people? Whether it's a formal party that you committed to and they've put in time and effort and the food and all of that expecting you, or it's something much more casual, like getting coffee with a friend and you feel like my schedule's insane today, I can't make it happen. We don't always know how much they were depending on that for whatever reason for their mental health. I think we forget that there's at minimum two people involved in any gathering and it's almost selfish. It's a fine line. Like, I don't want people to sacrifice their happiness or whatever, but I think we forget that there's somebody else to consider.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that we may not even be considering the detriment that this is doing to us in the long term when we sacrifice spending time with people to be behind our screens or chill at home, whatever we're doing instead. What do you see as the state of our platonic relationships and friendship in general in 2025?
I think a lot of people increasingly treat friendship as a placeholder for romantic relationships, especially before they get into one. They dedicate a level of effort and intimacy and interest toward their friends that tapers off once they find the real thing. I think most people have experienced something like that in their lives. But I think also societally, we have forgotten that for a very long time, for most of human history, your spouse was not your best friend. That's not how that worked. And it wasn't intended to. I've personally never liked when people say my husband or my wife is my best friend, because I think that to me represents an annexing of another very important and discrete social category, which is to say your most profound platonic relationships. I just really don't like the idea that a spouse should, in any scenario, check all of those boxes or absorb all of those roles. And this is not to say that you shouldn't feel friend-like emotions with a spouse, or you shouldn't enjoy their company the way you do a friend. But I also think that the role that your most profound, intimate platonic relationships play for you is just as much something to be cultivated and protected as a romantic relationship. And when you put the romantic relationship as someone who can do both or who owns both titles, I think that devalues, because no one's saying my best friend is also my spouse. We don't do it in the other direction. And I think, like I said, for almost all of human history and still to this day in much of the world, your spouse, your primary romantic relationship was not supposed to be your primary friend or platonic connection. And I think it's a good thing probably on the whole that our romantic partners fulfill more needs for us and we enjoy their company more than maybe we did in the past. But I also think it's important to remember that, especially for women, the platonic quote unquote village around us historically has always served an incredibly important purpose. Personally, with our children, if we have them in our domestic lives, these are very, very important roles and they form invisible netting of our lives. And so when the platonic relationships around us get devalued, not only does it hurt us in those ways because we're not getting those kinds of interactions and fulfillment, but it also puts way too much pressure on our romantic relationships because our romantic partner can't and shouldn't be everything for us.
I have read a lot of studies about the difference between men and women in this, and I'm sure you've heard this too. Like there's a men's mental health crisis, whatever we want to call that, going on with suicide rates and all these things. And they're pointing back to the reality that in many cases, men don't always have a strong network of friends through adulthood. Women are a little bit better at that if we're painting with a really broad brush. But I still think there is a deprioritizing when we hit that level of having a romantic partner, if we even do that. And then we can talk about what that looks like when people decide to have children. Then there's just one more priority that comes before our friends. And I think there's a lot of sadness that comes with that for people. We feel left out. We feel disconnected. It's too much time has passed. Now it's going to be insane to even try to catch up with this person. I forgot their birthday or whatever. The disconnect just widens the more time passes. And messages like yours about having people over, which to me is really taking the initiative and bringing people together and having those connections be prioritized. I feel like that's so critical in this state that we're in.
I agree totally.
You talk about the fact that you're child free in the introduction of the book, which, of course, as the host of this show, I appreciate. And I appreciate how you talk about it in your content otherwise. Why did you want to include that in this story?
Well, because I think for many people, our models of what social life looks like, especially in the home, is very centered around not just the family, but the nuclear family. And for a lot of people, their concern about the idea of not having children is not having people to spend those moments with or not having people who care about us in that way. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that not only are those moments and relationships and holidays things that we get to design to our own specifications, but also just because you have children does not mean they're going to show up for you in the way that you imagine them to. There's, I think, increasingly estrangement with children. I think most adults know some people who are estranged from their families or have very low connection with their families, if not that being their own case. Because I think historically, a lot of people have had children with the expectation slash demand that that child will be present for them in a certain way or dedicate a certain amount of time or portion of their lives to their parents, regardless of how they're treated, regardless of how they're embraced or not embraced. And I think people are starting to reject that paradigm and say, actually, I'm going to go where I'm loved, where I'm appreciated, where I feel good. So for those of us who don't want children, I think although it can be a little scary to think, okay, well, maybe there won't be someone who's here for me in this very specific way, that A, just because someone is a child doesn't mean they have to be or will be. And B, what you're describing, that connection, that spirit, that consistency, that can be found wherever we cultivate it and with whomever we cultivate it.
We've had conversations on the show with caregiving experts, death doulas who really reinforce they are there, right? They're at the bedside, they're doing the paperwork, the power of attorney, making decisions, all the things. And they always tell me that it's shocking how infrequently it's really a child who's taking on that role, whether it's instead a spouse, a sibling, a best friend, especially with women. I've heard a lot of stories about that. And in some ways, it brings me so much joy to think that friendship can be that deep. I mean, these are our darkest, scariest, most vulnerable moments. And to spend those with a friend, to me, what could be better? What more could I aspire to? And I also know that's not going to just happen on its own. I'm not going to be on my deathbed at hopefully 95 years old and I'm just going to be surrounded by people who show up. I have to work intentionally at those relationships every day between now till then so that anybody even cares, right? And wants to be around me or help me in those moments.
Exactly.
So let's talk about how we practically do that. Let's get to the nitty gritty of hosting parties. I'm sure there are some people listening who love to host and they're like lit up by this. There's probably also people listening who feel more introverted or just not natural at welcoming people in. So I would love some insight from both the host perspective and how we be good guest perspective to help people no matter where we are on the spectrum.
I think to your point about the people who will be there for me in these big moments or the people in whom I will have invested and taken the time, that applies to hosting and being a guest. I think we always have to do our absolute best in both sides of the agreement, so to speak, to think about what it looks like from the other person's end. Being a guest, that means showing up on time and when you say you will. It means not showing up empty handed. It means offering to help out. It means being a polite, considerate guest, saying please and thank you and all of this other stuff that I think used to be more common and now is a little bit more DIY. And then from the host perspective, how can you make your guests feel comfortable? How can you make their experience more seamless? How can you welcome them and greet them? And what food and drinks should you have out for them? And even basic things like making sure you ask about dietary restrictions or allergies and making sure you're serving food that everyone can enjoy and all of that stuff. I think it's so important to just remember that hosting, yes, it's nice to have pretty tablescapes and napkins and fancy glasses and fancy food and champagne and all of that stuff. And that's nice. And I do love parties like that. But that is not what makes a great party. That is not what makes a special party. That is not what makes people feel welcome or appreciated. What makes them feel those things is how you are interacting with them. This is one of the reasons why I say the most important thing when you're hosting is to maximize your time with your guests. If you're doing something that's going to keep you in the kitchen stressed out for the entire party, you might as well not have a party because ultimately, if your guests just want an extremely delicious, hot, consistent meal, they can go to a restaurant. They're coming to your house because they want to be with you. And I think that people often, when they think about hosting and entertaining, they get very focused on all of the things that to me are just set dressing, and they refuse to focus on what makes the experience special and worthwhile, which are all, for the most part, intangible things. And they're also, for the most part, things that don't cost any money.
What are some of your favorite tips to make a space feel really special and inviting when somebody walks in without us obsessing over having it perfect?
I always think about the five senses, right? Vision, you want the lighting to be warm and diffuse and flattering. So no big overhead light. I highly recommend getting smart bulbs so that you can adjust the temperature and the brightness, even just from your phone. We don't need dimmer switches anymore. We're in a new era. Candles always really help. I do warn against too many scented candles for especially a dinner party because it can interfere with the food and people get headaches. But beautiful beeswax candles, taper candles, pillar candles, all of those are gorgeous. So we had sight. When you think about sound, I highly recommend having a playlist, either making one or finding one that really complements the theme of whatever type of event you're going for. I love jazz stuff for a cocktail party. If I'm doing food from a certain part of the world, I like to find music from a certain part of that world and having that on a low ambient volume. It helps people also feel more comfortable to talk. Smell, I always think it's nice to have something nice going on the stove. In the winter, when I'm doing winter parties, I love to have a little pot boiling with a lot of aromatics, citrus, cinnamon, clove, allspice, that kind of stuff, so that it just smells like a little Santa's workshop type vibe when you come in the house. Touch, are things soft? Are there places to sit? Even something as simple as a floor pillow or a poof, an ottoman. Just making sure there's enough comfortable seating for people. Are there some pillows? Maybe if you're watching a movie night, do you have blankets for people to touch? Is there a nice tablecloth on the table? So touch is also a very important one. Taste, obviously. I mean, taste, I think for most people, the best part of the party is the food and drinks. So I always like to have a beverage station set up for people to serve themselves drinks. It also helps free up your time as the hostess. And I love to have something out for people to nibble on when they arrive, pretty much always a board of some kind. People just love a board.
They do. It's always the first thing that goes at my house. I love all of this. I'm going to think through the five senses when people come over the next time because there are definitely gaps, things I could be doing better or just making more intentional touch points for people. Can you give us some ideas for more creative ways to host? I feel like I've had 150 parties where we have beautiful snacks or dinner, we have alcohol, and I have music on. And that's the whole thing. I'm just relying on people to drink and have fun with each other and talk amongst themselves and tell stories, but there's not really a theme more than that. What are some other ideas?
I think for themes, remember that they can be taken from anywhere. Something that I really like to do is take a movie that I think has a really engaging aesthetic and make that the theme of the party in a very light way. So, what I'll do is I'll pick a movie, I'll put it on silent on the television. So it's playing in the background, and then I'll play the soundtrack over the speakers so that we get both the visuals and the music. I'll find some dishes that go with that theme. Something I really love to do is focus on books. I love to encourage people to bring a beloved book that goes with whatever theme we're doing and have them swap it because that also lets everyone leave with a nice little parting gift. I love colors as a theme. I think it's a very simple one that really evokes a strong sense of mood, especially if you're doing, let's say, a winter party and everything's navy or everything's oxblood or whatever the case is. I love something that simple. I also love to really lean into seasonality. I'm not a huge fan of artificial seasonal decor, but I always try to do a tablescape full of things that are seasonal. So in the winter, we'll have citrus and pomegranates and eucalyptus and these things. I'm actually not sure that eucalyptus is all that seasonal, but I get it dried anyway. So that's always in season. In the fall, you'll have squash and gourds and things out. And the summer, I love to put seashells and summer flowers, things that just evoke what time of year it is, what is happening in the world around us. I think people often feel very literal about themes, but I think it's just really important to remember that themes are just like you're putting a little parenthetical around your party. It's giving it a two little endpoints, but what happens in the middle, it does not have to be just because the theme is, I don't know, Dollywood. You don't have to go out and buy a million pink cowboy hats. You can do that in other ways. My theme for my New Year's party is going to be disco vampires. We're taking that very liberally. I thought of that because one of my favorite books of the past couple of years is about disco vampires. So I reached out to the author and I was like, can I get some copies to put out? I'm borrowing disco balls. But like, what does a disco vampire look like? Who knows? I can't wait to see what people's interpretation of that is.
Totally. Oh my God, that's the most fun theme ever. I also have a winter birthday, and my birthday is December 20th, so it's a nightmare to try to get people together. But whatever, we do that other times. But for my 40th birthday next year, I'm insisting that we'll find a date and do something. And my theme is vampire, and it can be Twilight, True Blood, Dracula, Halloween, garbage, whatever you want. So very much in alignment. I love it. And those are helpful tips because I do think something that holds me back, it's not necessarily the money, it's the sustainability. I don't want to buy a whole new set of plates because I have a new theme idea or get all these party favors that people are going to basically throw out, right? So I think people think of themes sometimes as restricting in that way, but I feel like what you're saying, it's more about an ambiance, a mood, something looser that still gives a little bit of direction to you as the host, but also the guests.
Yeah, and also remember that there are very easy, low cost ways to evoke a theme. Obviously, things like seasonal fruit, produce, flowers is one of them. Even something as simple as, let's say, cloth napkins that you reuse and put on your plate, what you tie that napkin with. In the winter, it can be a dark velvet ribbon. In the summer, it can be a piece of twine with a little flower in it. There are a million ways to make small changes that have a pretty dramatic impact on what the actual feel and mood of the party is.
You also talk about adult sleepovers, which I want to discuss because I do this. Whatever on the cool girl scale, I'm very much on the desperate side. I'm always like, come to my party, stay all night, sleep over, stay for a weekend. So I love an adult sleepover. And again, we have this house to fill with friendship, but I feel like it's pretty foreign to most people outside of my immediate friend group. And I love that you're an advocate for it. Say more about that.
I think it's just so important to remember that, again, especially if you, like most Americans, live in a larger space, that we have this space for a reason. Why not use it? Why not turn your guest room one weekend into a little boutique hotel? Why not invite your friends over in that way? Because I think not only is it wonderful for the person who gets to stay the night because it's like a little mini vacation. It could even be within the same week, a weeknight. This is also a lot more accessible for people who maybe don't have the time or money or bandwidth to travel far, for people like moms who maybe can't be away from their small child for more than a night, but one night away can make a big difference. So I think there's a lot of functional, practical reasons that it's wonderful, but also for me, it engenders a level of intimacy that we often don't get when we're just meeting someone for a drink or for dinner. It just forms a stronger bond. And I often think to myself that my strongest relationships by far are the people that live in my immediate neighborhood and the people that live far away. Because with the people that live far away, we will make an effort to spend a weekend together, have these long phone calls, really invest in that relationship in an intentional way because we know that it won't happen without it. The friends who live nearby, we see each other constantly in small, easy touch points. So I think the adult sleepover is often a really good option for that middle ground, people who maybe you don't see casually on a day-to-day basis, but you also aren't planning a really long getaway with. One of my friends that I often will do a sleepover with is she's a woman that lives in New York City, but in a different borough from me. So it's not easy to just casually see her, but it also is just a 40-minute bus ride for her to come through.
It's so true. It is somehow easier. My best friend lives in Ohio. I live in Chicago. We just got back from a little best friend trip to London together. I'll prioritize that above almost anything else because it's so precious to me to have time with her when we see each other infrequently. And then I have friends who live here in Wicker Park and we see each other constantly. But it's like that in between, it just doesn't happen as much. And beyond that, there is something especially intimate about having coffee when you see each other first thing in the morning when you wake up and saying goodnight when you depart to go to your room. I just think it's so special, so underdone. And due to your book, this is one of my resolutions for 2026. And I hope everybody listening does the same thing, especially those of us here. We don't have kids. It's easier, frankly, for us to do that. And it is a nice invitation for our mom friends who probably can't run away for a girls' weekend or week as easily as we can.
Totally. And I think you're absolutely right. I understand that there are all different reasons for not wanting children. And if your reason for that is just, I want to be alone, that is valid and your choice and your right. But for those of us who don't want children but still greatly value connection, I think it's our responsibility to lean into what we are able to do and to lean into what is great about it. I think a lot of mothers would say that having children is the great joy of their lives. I think very strongly that not having children is the great joy of my life because I really think about it in terms of what it allows me to do and be and create for myself and for others. And this is a perfect example. I'm able to create experiences and have moments, especially for my friends with children who aren't as able to do it, in a way that I think makes life so magical and special and enjoyable. Like even tonight, I'm having a friend of mine come over from Queens, actually. She is my oldest friend in the city. We've been close friends since we were 14 years old, but she's going to come over and trim the tree with me tonight. And I'm going out after this to get eggnog and some other yummy stuff for dinner. And I think moments like that, it's absolutely not to say you can't do them when you have children, but the ease, the relative ease and the relative ability that I have to create a life like that and to bring it to so many other people, that is a great joy.
So well said. Beautiful. I feel the same. It's a joy to live this lifestyle. And still, sometimes I get in the boring routine of scrolling on my phone after work or just working until I go to bed and blah, blah, blah. So it's nice to have these reminders. Okay, so the special experiences we create as a host are a gift to us and to the people who we host. Let's talk for just a couple minutes about being a guest because sometimes, especially with somebody I'm not close with, if I'm going to a party in someone's home and I barely know them, I don't always know, should I be offering to go in the kitchen and help them cook? Do they not want me to go in the kitchen because I've never been in their kitchen before? What do I do to make sure I'm the type of person who always gets invited back?
So, with a close friend, jump in, roll up a sleeve, help. Don't even ask, just start helping. I think a couple things for a guest is again, never show up empty handed, never show up early. If you don't know the person well, I wouldn't just invite yourself into their kitchen. They may not want that to be seen by guests. That being said, I think there are always small ways that you can be helpful that don't involve any invasion like that. If you see some stuff scattered around the table, you can pick it up and stack it into something and set it to the side. It's always nice to offer to help in whatever way you can. But I feel like if you don't know the person very well, the best way to be a good guest is just to be polite, respectful, and not create burden. That's how I think of it. And if you are a good friend, to jump in, because often it can be more mental load for the person to think of what you can do. Just saying, what can I do? Just observe something that could use a little help. If she's clearing the table, help her clear the table. So I think it's a nuanced thing, but I think also it's so important to remember that these are muscles that get built with time, and starting to understand more and more what it looks like to be a good host and a good guest is something that you will develop naturally as you do it more.
I love that. I think sometimes we're too uptight about what do I do? Do I jump in? Do I not jump in? Or sometimes I see that we host a lot of parties here, and sometimes I'm largely just paying attention to what I need to be getting done as the host. But it is so nice when somebody just sees a plate on an end table and brings it into the kitchen. Not that I'm expecting people to do that, but I really notice it because I'm not going to ask anybody, can somebody please go around and clear plates? I'm just not going to. And when somebody just does it without a second guess or refills toilet paper in the bathroom, it's like, yes, I want you to feel at home here. Again, it's not your responsibility, but it's a really nice touch when a guest just jumps in and does something really obvious and they're not scared to do that.
Totally. Yeah, I agree.
What are some of your favorite host gifts? I feel like I'm sick of bringing bottles of wine, but what else do we bring?
When I'm a guest, I like to bring two gifts, one for the party, one for the host. So I'll often bring a bottle for the evening, and then I'll bring a pastry for their breakfast the next day. I also love gifts that are for hosting another event. So I'll bring linen napkins, cocktail skewers, napkin rings, coasters, anything that I know that would be put to good use. I love anything secondhand. I love anything homemade. I love anything from somewhere else in the world. Anything that feels something they wouldn't necessarily go out and buy for themselves, but they'll enjoy. Those to me are the best kinds of gifts.
Those are good suggestions. We're a big fan of everything secondhand around here. And I feel like this is such a fun time of year at thrift stores and vintage shops. They save some of their best stuff for the holiday market that they know is coming, and just stocking up on little trinkets, little things that, again, are helpful and additive. I feel like this is a fun time of year to be in the spirit of stockpiling some host gifts.
I agree.
Chelsea, I could talk to you forever. I wish I could go to one of your parties. I wish you could come to one of my parties because I just love your whole sentiment around this. And we will be linking all of your things, the book and everything else about you in the show notes. But as we close, big picture, what do you hope the impact is of your book, having people over and just conversations about spending more time together?
I just hope people, as I said in the beginning, yes, sometimes money can be a factor, but when it comes to casual, low stakes hangouts in the home, money is rarely the barrier for most of us. And I think it is important to remember that getting comfortable and fluent in enjoying your home, using it, being in it, in the long term, it actually ends up saving you a lot of money because you no longer always need to be outsourcing to a third space in order to enjoy someone's company. And you also are getting more use out of what is, for most of us, the largest monthly expense we have. So I do think it's helpful to see it through that prism. And I think it's also helpful to remember that there's a lot of data in the book about this, but you can just look it up. Humans need community and relationships as much as they need food and water, basically, and daily movement. It's essential to the human brain. It's essential to the human body. We long for it. We miss it when it's gone. Loneliness is one of the worst things for our health. Yeah, so remember that even though it sometimes feels scary, the cost of not cultivating this very important part of your life and identity is very, very great.
Important reminders at this time of year and any. Thank you so, so much for coming and sharing all of this genius with us. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me, and yay, child free.
Yay, child free. If this episode sparked something new in you, come join the conversation on Substack at curiouslifeofachildfreewoman.substack.com. Podcasting is amazing, but I have been craving a more two-way conversation with you, and the Curious Life Club on Substack provides that. Subscribe for free bonus content, weekly reflections, and sneak peeks into what's next. Of course, don't forget to follow on Instagram, Curious Life of a Child-Free Woman, for more stories, guest highlights, and moments that remind us why curiosity is so important. Until next time, let's stay curious together.